Welcome to Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Why don't we just get right into it? Why don't you introduce our guest that we have today, Ray?
I'll be glad to. We've got William Pellas with us today. And Will, I want you to introduce yourself. I know you and I have met through Todd Ryder and his uh, for, Forgotten Creators
Yes,
and the
sir.
story about the German nuclear program. But you've got an interesting insight into the Japanese nuclear program that we want to talk about and some other things. But again, I need you to introduce yourself because we've just met and I don't know enough about you to give you a decent introduction.
Sure.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that. All right. My background is that I'm the son of a World War II U.S. Navy sailor. And so I grew up surrounded by the history of the conflict, and I read a lot of the popular histories of that time. For example, my father, I'll never forget it. Back in the day when they used to do things like this, he bought the entire Time Life World War II series, and I used to wait. I was looking forward to it coming in the mail every month back when people did that. It was a wonderful introduction, and of course, I had a lot of firsthand history so I had that as background, and then I always had the interest in it, especially in the naval affairs. And then I went to college, got my undergraduate degree at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Bet you didn't know there was an Indiana University of PA. There is. And by the way, that's not Big Ten Indiana. It's in Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is the hometown of Jimmy Stewart. But anyway. After that, several years later, I went to grad school for a semester at Penn State in 1995. That was the 50-year anniversary, of course, of the end of World War II. And I began to notice, because you couldn't ignore them, all of the agitprop that was going on there. The atomic bombs were racist. This should never have happened. Every time they talk about it, the casualties get greater and greater. And oh, this is such an outrage and blah, blah, blah. And I knew instinctively that was Bravo Sierra, shall we say. But I thought, all right, it had been several years at that point since I had actually really looked into this. I said, all right, well, I'll start doing some research. And right on cue, I was listening to a local talk radio station, this again, State College, Pennsylvania. And they were talking about this book by Robert Wilcox. We all know the book, Japan's Secret War. There you go. Okay, now very good. Now that's the 1985 original, and there's a lot of.
This is a first edition.
Yes. All right. Now there's something very important about that I'll get into in a minute. Actually, a number of things. So they were talking about the second edition, which he kind of threw together on the fly. Now he doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of new information in the second edition, but there are some very interesting tidbits, including a probable sighting of Robert Furman. I know you know who he was.
Yeah.
The spook in the Pentagon, one of the U.S. Army's top secret agents of World War II and Korea, apparently. Also, the original lead investigator of ALSOS, or the Asian ALSOS, into the Japanese program. So anyway, with this as background, I started digging into this, and I was convinced fairly quickly that Wilcox was onto something, just because of the quality of the sources from which he drew. And that began the 30-year process that led to us being here today. Now, as far as my historian's credentials, I guess you would call me an autodidact, a semi-professional. And by the way, that's not because I didn't want to go on and have the PhD after my name or whatever. In fact, I had planned, after that experience and beginning to realize that there was a very big story here that was not being communicated to the public. That was very much my inspiration to try and go forward with my PhD. But what happened was just life, life intervened. And I was working for a company at the time that was bought out in a merger. Everybody walked the plank. Everybody got fired. And it's just been, hand to mouth pretty much ever since, going from that. That's actually happened 4 times. I've been through 4, 4 buyouts, takeovers. Finally, I just said, the heck with it. I'll just go and be a contractor like my late father was. And so that prevented me from having the time to really, complete the official, credentials. So I went ahead and decided to do what I could do. And after that is when I actually looked up Robert Wilcox. Now, again, this is how long ago this was. He was in the phone book. I was able to find him in Los Angeles, no problem. So I called him up, and this was about 2001, about 6 years later. The British Broadcasting Corporation ran a story. You can look this up. And by the way, I hope you don't mind. My purpose here is to breadcrumb the trail that I went down that led to us all being here, if that's okay. And
Sure.
Okay, very good. And I think I'm unique in this regard, in as much as I think I'm the only I guess, name in this field right now that came at it from the Japanese side and migrated to the German side, as opposed to everybody else looking at Germany and then saying, oh, wait, Japan's doing something too, right? So my initial focus was on the Pacific, first because my father fought in the Pacific in the U.S. Navy. And secondly, so I had more of a feel for that initially. And secondly, because of Wilcox's book. Okay, so that's the background. And by the way, Ray, I encountered you on the internet about 20 years ago. Should have reached out to you back then, but I saw your invite to Carter Heydrich.
Yes.
And I've actually linked to that presentation a number of times in my writing on the internet. So we were, ships passing in the night a long time ago. All right, so
you mentioned Carter, so we ought to show his book.
Yes.
Carter's book, Critical Mass, is the one that got me started in questioning what was actually going on in Germany.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
it. Okay. Now go ahead.
Yes, sir. Okay. So now, as you know, also, there were more than just the now famous or infamous German U-boat U-234 that was on its way to Japan. There was something like at least 10 at war's end, if not more than that. You have information about that, Ray?
I do not. No, that's new information for me.
Okay. According to, now this is one of the tidbits in Todd Ryder's book. There were apparently at least 10 U-boats crammed with all kinds of German goodies, and in some cases with Japanese personnel along for the ride, that attempted to sail from Germany or German-controlled land to Japan at war's end. Well, I don't have to tell you that was not done for giggles. They were obviously trying to send advanced weaponry, and in particular nuclear weapons materiel there. All right, so there's the background. So I start digging into all this stuff. I start talking with Mr. Wilcox, and at that time in 2001 or 2000, I think it was 2001, the BBC published an article. I'm going to try to link it here in just a moment, and if it blows up, we'll just have to do,
Oh, you can do it. Go
all
ahead
right.
if you want to.
The article is called "Atomic Plans Returned to Japan." Atomic Plans Returned to Japan. That's by Jane Warr, W-A-R-R, was the BBC reporter. Now, in that article is one of the first references to what we now know as the Kuroda Papers, Kuroda. That's after Kazuo Kuroda. After the war, he went by the name Paul, the anglicized name Paul. Married a Danish woman, emigrated to the United States, and became a distinguished chemistry professor at the University of Arkansas. I am not making this up. You can look this all up. This all happened. I mean, history is just amazing. So Kuroda was known for inviting his PhD students to his home, where he'd have, green tea or some, Japanese dinner there. And then he would bring out this dossier that he smuggled out from Japan at war's end. This was a 23-page record of several lectures that were given by Yoshio Yoshi Nishina. Now, he was the head of the Japanese Army's atomic bomb program, headquartered at the Riken Institute north of Japan. The Riken was basically Japan's version of Los Alamos. It was their beginning of what we might call big science. Now, this is touched upon in the Jane War article. Now, I'm going to try to bring that up here real quick. And again, if it's too distracting, we'll just do, interview here. But let me see if I can find it. So give me just a moment. BBC atomic plans returned to Japan. Okay, there it is. 2002, August 3rd, 2002.
All right. Go ahead and share your screen.
All right, here we go. Let's see if this will come up. And let's try this. Do you see it?
No.
Okay.
Hit your share screen.
Just did. Yep. Okay. Oh, I see. Wait a minute. Chrome tab. Here we go. There we go. Let's try this. Now let's see if you can see it.
Got it.
Okay.
Plans return to Japan.
Okay. Yes, sir. All right. So that is the article that prompted me to reach out to Wilcox. And that also, in some extent, prompted him to begin thinking about a third edition of Japan's Secret War. Do you have that book?
No, I do not.
Okay. Eventually, at the same time, I encountered someone on the Axis History Forum. I don't know if you gentlemen have visited that website. Okay. There is a now more than 20-year-old thread called Japan Nuclear Weapons Program. Japan Nuclear Weapons Program. And I'll see if I can bring that up here in just a moment. That was the beginning of my whole thought process to try and organize and collate everything that I was seeing. That in turn led me to encounter a gentleman on that site named Dwight Ryder. Same last name as Todd, possibly a distant relative. We weren't able to establish that prior to Dwight's untimely death in 2022. Dwight was a ex-United States Air Force targeting and intelligence officer who had spent years at the U.S. National Archives researching the Japanese nuclear weapons program. So I got acquainted with Dwight, and in 2012, after Wilcox hired both myself and Dwight as researchers for the third edition of Japan's Secret War, I journeyed to the U.S. National Archives. Now, in the meantime, I know this is a lot of information, and I apologize, but I'm like Todd. I'm going at warp speed here. In the meantime, I had encountered another document, which is one of the most extraordinary things that I've ever seen in World War II historiography. In fact, when I first saw it, I was pretty sure it was somehow some kind of a fake. I didn't believe it. Well, this was a World War II magic intercept. I'm guessing you gentlemen have heard of magic in the context of World War II.
I have, yes.
Okay.
You might, for our viewers, you might explain a little bit about it.
Yes. Okay. Now, in the early days of World War II, the United States Navy, and to some extent the Army, and with a significant assist from the British, developed signals intercepts and decryption capabilities that were directed at the highest levels of Japanese radio traffic. Okay. The files that described what they intercepted, decrypted and translated were given the code name Magic. this was almost eyes only for the president level intelligence. There were very, very few people in World War II who knew of the existence of this intelligence. It was top secret, extremely crucial to the war effort. The magic intercepts, by and large, were not decrypted at all until 1978, and most of them until 1995 and beyond, the 50-year mark past the end of World War II, which, by the way, is why the best of the more recent World War II histories are where you really need to go to find out what was really happening from the primary sources that were produced during the war itself. So there's a magic intercept that I came across by way of a Kiwi. By that, I mean a New Zealander. His name is Simon Gunson. Now, Gunson is an interesting bird, pun intended. I've tried many times to include him in this. He's had some health issues, and he's kind of a prickly pear anyway. And I'm trying to be as fair as I can be here. Gunson has made a number of claims around the internet. If you look into this, you'll see it. A lot of what he says is correct. Some of it is not. But he did post a number of original documents, many of them from the British end of the spectrum, so much so that I began to suspect that he was British intelligence. Dwight Ryder, whom I mentioned a moment ago, I think outed Simon as a retired British intelligence asset. Dwight used to say, "It takes one to know one." I don't know if that's true. I actually confronted Simon about that a couple of years ago, and he mumbled something like, "Oh, I had family members that were in it." Oh, okay, very good. Well, anyway, so one of the documents that Simon posted in his writing was an actual magic intercept claiming that there were German nuclear weapons used against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front in World War II. Now, this intercept was of a radio transmission sent from a Japanese operative in Stockholm, Sweden, nominally neutral Stockholm, back to Tokyo. And so when I went to the National Archives in 2012, I made a beeline to see if this document exists. It does. It does exist. Now, okay, I wrote a book about this. My second book is about this. It's called The Japanese Bomb by Way of Germany, ? And this was another one of the signposts along the way to Todd Ryder reaching out to contact me. So you're starting to see the chain here. Anyway, so I'm still not entirely sure what to make of this document. Todd discusses it a little bit in Forgotten Creators. I went into some detail in my little booklets, 80 pages, but I wrote that prior to meeting Todd, and that was my attempt to organize all of these bits and pieces that we're talking about here into some semblance of my best guess as to what was actually going on. So let me see if we can reset. All right. So we had a Japanese program that was definitely attempting to build atomic fission bombs. Nishina was the head of this effort, the nominal head. We have the Kuroda Papers, which are a record of several meetings given by Nishina, or kind of lectures, where he was meeting with officials from the Tokyo Army Arsenal. The acronym for this is TONIZO, in rendered into English, TONIZO. Excuse me. That's why the Kuroda Papers will sometimes be referred to as the TONIZO Report. Now, Dwight Ryder, prior to his death, wrote a lengthy paper analyzing the Kuroda Papers. This is archived on the internet, on the answer I wrote on Quora about the Japanese program, which I'll link to here in a minute. But Nishina went into great detail about his bomb concept. Now, it paralleled the American Oppenheimer bomb pretty closely, except if I had to guess it, I think he's talking about an implosion rather than a gun type weapon, as near as I can tell. But he talks about the need for a spark plug, as the Americans called it. Nishina, I think, referred to it as an initiator. He was talking about using a polonium neutron emitter as the beginning of the supercritical prompt supercritical reaction, the explosion. He talked about U-235 as the bomb fuel. He talked about his estimate as to what he called the nuclear parameters. He talked about certain aspects of what we now know as the four-factor formula, which you need in order to do the calculations to set off the bomb, et cetera, et cetera. So these were very advanced conceptual studies. So we know that the best Japanese nuclear scientists did know how to create an atomic detonation. And the reason for that, in addition to their own prowess, is that they had studied in Germany in the years between World War I and World War II. Nishina and also Bunsaku Erakatsu, who later would head up the Navy's parallel program, because, of course, in Japan, the Army and the Navy had to compete in everything. The Army had its own Navy. The Navy had its own Army. They were at each other's throats. They hated each other. I've even read claims that there were assassinations going on. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, so the Japanese scientists had been educated in Japan. They took this knowledge back to Japan. Their top two scientists, arguably, were retained by the Army and the Navy, respectively, although there were others besides these two. And they began to develop nuclear weapons, and in the case of the Navy, nuclear propulsion for Japan in World War II. Now, fast forward to the early 2000s when, again, some of this information begins to leak out, first of all by declassifications at NARA, National Archives and Records Administration. Secondly, by a few of the stories, for example, the BBC story. At that time, Dwight was working as a private sector intelligence analyst, and he got involved in giving a briefing of some kind to State Department officials. Now, this was during the six-party talks that were designed to rein in the North Korean program. Japan was part of this. Well, in his paper, Dwight has a paper about this called Burn Before Reading by Dwight Ryder, where he describes his interaction with these U.S. State Department officials who, according to him, interrupted him repeatedly, acted in a very juvenile way, and basically made it clear that they didn't want to hear anything about this World War II Japanese nuclear weapons program, which, by the way, was concentrated largely in, does anybody know where that was?
No.
It was in Northern Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Now, why was it in Northern Korea? Two reasons. Japan had conquered Korea in the 1904-1905 Russo-Japanese War. And in the 40 years between the end of that war and the end of World War II, they built up a massive heavy industrial belt in Korea, which included huge, enormous hydroelectric plants. So when you start talking about this story to adherents of the conventional history, the first thing they'll say is, blah, 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 no, they didn't have the electricity. Blah, 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 blah. No, they did have it. It just wasn't in mainland Japan. It was in Northern Korea. And by the way, one of the major facilities, irony of ironies, was near Chosin, as in the frozen Chosin, the famous U.S. Marine Corps battle of the Korean War. The U.S. Marines were fighting on the frozen man-made lake of the Chosin Reservoir, which was part of the Japanese hydroelectric facilities that were used in their World War II nuclear weapons program. but you won't find this in most of the history books. So here we have so we have the Marines fighting on the Chosin Reservoir, which itself was left over from World War II and the Japanese nuclear weapons effort there. 50 years later, here's Dwight trying to talk about this to the State Department, which says, we don't want to hear about this because, first of all, Korea is going to say, well, who are you to tell us to do this? Secondly, Japan's going to say, no, wait a minute. We've been a good boy all these years. We've signed the non-nuclear principles. Our prime minister won the Nobel Peace Prize, the only Japanese ever to win it, by the way. That was Prime Minister Sato in the 1970s. And so, why should we go along with all this? So you have active U.S. State Department obstruction circa 2000, which again is about the time I began to come into all this. And Dwight describes this in his paper, Burn Before Reading. So we're doing this research project. I come into contact with Dwight and Robert Wilcox. Now another figure enters the play. His name was Tony Tuluba, and this is described in the 3rd edition of Japan's Secret War. Tuluba was a CIA researcher who, like Dwight, was also digging into the World War II Japanese nuclear weapons program at around the same time as the six-party talks. Tuluba also encountered institutional resistance to this, and so he decided to go around officialdom, and he contacted Wilcox directly and dropped this tidbit. According to Tuluba, and Dwight Ryder also discovered this independently, from late 1944 on, there were about 3,000 German SS personnel in Hungnam, North Korea. Why were there SS personnel in North Korea? Who, according to Todd Ryder's research, was the main player in the German nuclear weapons program? It wasn't Werner Heisenberg. It was the SS. Now you see where we're going with this? So we have SS personnel in North Korea in the late stages of World War II. Along with this, one of the other fragmentary but real pieces of evidence that surfaced about this, and again, I have to credit Simon Gunson for publicizing this particular aspect, there is a major volcanic island in the Kurile Islands chain known variously as Matsuwa or Matua, M-A-T-S-U-W-A, sometimes spelled M-A-T-U-A. This is about a 2 square mile volcanic island, fairly sizable. And World War II Japan had a pretty heavily equipped garrison there, including tanks, which were relatively rare in the Japanese order of battle. And they had 2 major airfields on this island, which were kept ice-free year-round by geothermal piping that came in from the volcano. Now, that's kind of a strange place to put a couple of massive airfields. So what were they doing there? Well, it might have been used to facilitate communications and possibly technological transfer between Germany and Japan in their nuclear weapons program. There are photos of German fuel drums, hundreds of them, that are sitting there today, aviation fuel drums rusting in the open on these old airfields. Now, if you read the conventional version of events, they say, oh, well, these were probably captured by the Russians and they just dropped them there at the end of World War II or after World War II. Well, okay, that's possible, but that seems like a little bit of a reach. Surely the more logical explanation is that they were used by German aircraft during World War II. Now, what were these aircraft? You've heard of the America Bomber project. The Germans did complete a handful of America Bomber prototypes, including the Me-264, which, by the way, bore a suspicious resemblance to the American B-29, just saying. But anyway, we know that at least one of these prototypes was used in several long-distance flights between Finland over the Arctic down the Soviet Pacific coast to Japan. Matsuwa was probably a refueling stop for these flights. So we have, again, this is fragmentary, and I'm sure you're getting that sense. But all of these bits and pieces of evidence are consistent, and they do point to cooperation between Germany and Japan, and by the way, Italy, before they were knocked out of the war, on nuclear weapons. Now, in addition, we have the deliberate obfuscation by the U.S. State Department, which I've mentioned. We have the refusal of the conventional historians to
Hey,
give.
Will,
Yes.
can we get to the Japanese program more?
Yes. All right. Very good.
Because we
Sorry.
don't have enough time for you to go on
Okay.
longer. Okay.
Okay. Sure. We'll focus more in on the Japanese program. All right. So again, the cooperation here goes back much further. And let me see if I can bring up this. I'm going to stop this share with the BBC article. The cooperation here goes back much further. I'm going to see if I can share this screen here. Let's see if we can do this. Chrome tab. Okay. Let's see. There we are. Okay, let's see this. Can you see that photograph?
Yes, Japanese nuclear scientist. Good.
Okay. All right. Now there's Nishina, the future head of the Japanese Army program. He's on the far left. Three people to his right, we see Werner Heisenberg. This is in 1929. Now there's a Japanese journalist who wrote an article a few years ago, again, which I've archived in this piece, who talked about the formation of an organization called Bund Ein, German for Alliance One, that came out of this meeting that you're looking at right here at the Riken Institute. Again, this is the beginning of Japanese big science, as we would call it in the United States. Bund Ein was formed to mine for uranium in mainland Japan, and it was a consortium, an industrial consortium that was formed together with Germany. So this cooperation goes way, way back, well before World War II. Now, so the Japanese in 1940, they are looking at various articles, including American articles that are published on nuclear fission. This comes to the attention of one of the muckety-mucks in the Japanese Army Aviation Administration, General Takeo Yasuda. Yasuda gets interested in this and brings in the Army scientist, Lieutenant Colonel Tatsusuburo Suzuki. Tatsusuburo Suzuki. He would resurface in Tokyo in 1995 at a press conference where he disclosed many of the details that I'm talking about right now. The complete audio of that conference is on YouTube. The last name is Suzuki. The first name is Tatsusuburo Suzuki, Japanese Army Lieutenant Colonel. So Yasuda commissioned Suzuki to do a survey of the industrial potential of the Japanese Empire of that time. He files a report, brings it back to Yasuda, and concludes two things. First, he says a Japanese atomic bomb is feasible. He believed that the Japanese did have sufficient material and industrial and scientific resources to build their own bomb. And his second major conclusion was, we better get on it now because it looks like the Western powers are already doing so. Now, as it turned out, the United States was late to the party. It was actually the British at this point with the tube alloys program who had begun their attempt to weaponize the atom. However, Suzuki was still able to discern correctly that the Western powers were interested in doing this. So the Army organizes their program under Nishina, and they start fairly leisurely at first because the Pacific War had not yet broken out between Japan and the United States. And although China was a quagmire, Japan seemed to have the upper hand. So this was kind of in that, that's interesting, but not yet necessarily crucial. Well, after the Pacific War broke out, more resources began to be poured into this. Now, here's where I have to contrast something in the conventional history versus what really happened. According to the conventional history, there was a meeting 2 years later in 1943, including Nishina, where actually it was a series of meetings where a lot of Japanese muckety-mucks got together to see if they could build an atomic bomb. Okay, why were they doing this when the Army was already underway? Well, because the Army project was a black project and not everybody was aware of it. So they have these meetings, and officially they conclude there's no way we can build it because we don't have enough electrical resources in mainland Japan. Again, I think that's baloney, because according to a U.S. intelligence report from a colonel by the name of Cecil Nist, N-I-S-T, Japan had 2.5 times as much hydroelectric capacity in Northern Korea as you guys had in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So they had more than enough electrical power to run massive machinery to do this. So,
do you have any evidence of what they used to actually generate the nuclear material?
as far as what machinery they were using?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. This is covered in Wilcox's book. Initially, Nishina was investigating thermal diffusion, which is also what tube alloys and the Germans and the Americans looked into. Now, as far as we know, Nishina built a pilot apparatus in Tokyo. This was later destroyed in the Great Tokyo Fire Raid of April 1945. Suzuki re-enters the picture in 1944 because the Japanese army was apparently dissatisfied with the progress of the atomic bomb program. We know that Suzuki commissioned the construction of additional and much larger thermal diffusion separators. Several of these were built in mainland Japan. Apparently, some low enriched uranium was produced by these machines. How much, we don't know. Officially, not much, but again, there are stories.
Do you have any documents that show anything about those thermal diffusion?
That is in Wilcox's book, in Japan's Secret War. Now, there are articles that have appeared in more recent years, including by Jake Adelstein, Adelstein, Adelstein or Adelstein. He was a Los Angeles Times reporter who has written a number of pieces about this. Documents have surfaced which describe Japanese ultracentrifuge designs, and apparently at least one of these was built. Now, this was under the auspices of the Japanese Navy program under Arakatsu, and this was at Kyoto University. Now, here's a major historical irony for you. And again, my apologies. I know I'm throwing stuff at you at warp speed. But Kyoto was the ancient Japanese capital city, and it was originally scheduled to be hit by American atomic bombs. The American Secretary of State at that time, his name escapes me, he was an elder statesman,
Henry Stimson.
78-year-old Henry Stimson. Stimson specifically lobbied for Kyoto to be excluded from the American atomic bomb target list. I'm going to infer from that Stimson did not know that Kyoto was one of the epicenters of Japanese nuclear weapons research and development under Arakatsu and the Navy. He never knew that, I'm sure. So that's one of the great ironies of history in my view. But anyway, so the Navy is working on the ultracentrifuge. According to Wilcox, at least one sizable centrifuge was completed. It was destroyed by B-29s while it was at a railroad siding in mainland Japan, headed to be shipped to Korea. What else was going on in Korea? We don't know. But we do know that when the Soviet Union rolled into Northern Korea, which of course resulted ultimately in the creation of the nation of Northern Korea, We know that SMERSH technical intelligence teams accompanied the Red Army, and they overran Hungnam, and they captured something there, which was taken back to the Soviet Union for several years after World War II by submarine. There are reports of a large, noticeable blue light at night, some kind of extremely heavy industrial, very power intensive something going on with a blue glow at night. What that might have been, I don't know, but I can hazard a guess because according to Suzuki's 1995 press conference, there was a proposal during the war by a Japanese nuclear physicist to scrap multiple Japanese warships to obtain 50,000 tons of steel to build a gigantic cyclotron for the production of fissile material. The Japanese have always loved their cyclotrons. So what might have been going on in Japan is, or in North Korea, is that. Or it may have been a form of electronuclear breeding, which, again, per Todd Ryder, the Germans also explored. And if we allow for this cross-pollination between Germany and Japan, maybe that was one aspect of it. We don't know. But I can tell you that according to Boris Chertok, Chertok, Boris Chertok, who died fairly recently, he was 90-something years old. But Chertok was a major Soviet rocket scientist, and he said specifically that the Soviet nuclear weapons program got a large boost from what it captured from both Germany and Japan in Northern Korea. So again, these are fragmentary.
Right. Now let's focus more on what happened in North Korea. Did they ever actually get to an attempt to?
Okay, according to, now here's one of the major aspects of this story. In 1946, in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, a reputable American reporter by the name of David Snell, Snell, David Snell, entirely mainstream, respectable news reporter, etc., etc. Snell published a couple of articles in 1946 in that newspaper describing an interview he had with a Japanese VIP at war's end in Korea. Now, how did Snell come upon this?
Because do you have a copy of that you could show us?
Yes, let me bring that up here.
Thank you.
Give me just a moment. Let me scroll up here in this article. Oh, and by the way, well, here, I'll show you that here in a minute. There's something else I wanted to go over this. Okay. Let me stop sharing this and start sharing another one. So let's go to here. Let's see, is it there? There we go. All right, let's have a look here. Do you see it?
Yeah. Japan developed atomic bomb, atom bomb.
Russians grabbed scientists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That's the 1946 article that marks apparently the first appearance of this Japanese nuclear weapons black project or alleged black project in Western sources. So he goes on to describe the bomb, which he called the Genzai Bakudan, which apparently is not a entirely correct rendering. It's Genshai Hakkaidan, which means element bomb, according to that magic intercept that I mentioned way back. That is mentioned by the American translator, and there's a note there, and he says in the note, that is a bomb that derives its explosive power from atomic fission. That's what Genshai Hakkaidan means. So Snell, who was working with a criminal investigation detachment in the U.S. Army, i.e. military police, is interviewing this Japanese VIP who describes this Japanese nuclear weapons program headquartered primarily in Northern Korea. He claims that they actually tested a device off the the coast of northern Korea, not far from Hungnam, in right after Nagasaki. So, if Japan really did this, why did they surrender? Now, this is crucial. I'll get into that in just a minute, but that's the story. Now, that has been attacked by numerous researchers, scholars. I can name names if you want. It's not hard to find them. Wikipedia has quotes two people in 1985 as saying Wilcox is full of baloney. So that's the end of it, and that's as far as Wikipedia goes.
I understand. Let's continue on. Now, we don't have much more time.
Okay.
Show us what you've got about the details of that test.
Well, okay. According to Snell's article, the Japanese bomb was taken from northern Korea, apparently some underground factories, trucked down a road of about 70 miles, which again was the site of massive battles between U.S. and allied forces and the Northern Koreans and Chinese during the Korean War. The bomb was trucked down the coast trucked down to the coast, loaded onto a robot launch, a junk apparently. And in this inlet off the Sea of Japan, the Japanese had placed a number of junks, smaller ships, apparently, maybe some derelicts, wrecks, whatever. According to the story told to Snell by the Japanese VIP, the bomb was steered out on this robot launch to the inlet. It was set off, and there's a description of the ships burning and this massive fireball and so on. That's the story. Now, there are some aspects of this that are interesting that I think lend credence to it. Remember that the United States was planning to invade Japan. That was Operation Olympic. Why did the Japanese sail this bomb out on a boat into the middle of other ships? Well, the logical explanation is that they intended to use it against the invasion fleet, the Operation Olympic fleet. This as opposed to the American and the German test detonations, which were all done either on a test stand several hundred feet in the air or airdropped. So the Japanese apparently had in mind to use their nuclear weapons, if they existed and could be finished in time, against the invasion fleet. We also know from the 1995 press conference from Suzuki in Tokyo that they wanted to use their bomb against the American B-29 bases on Guam and Tinian, which again would be an eminently practical and logical use of the weapon, because that would have cut off the head of the American strategic bombing offensive, which was laying waste to Japan from one end to the other. So, again, apparently, if it existed, a uranium bomb. Now, one other aspect that's interesting here. The Japanese bomb may have included uranium-233. Now, everybody forgets about that. 233 is produced in much the same way that plutonium is, but it's produced from thorium-232 as opposed to uranium-238. We know the Japanese mined a great deal of thorium in northern Korea. They also mined uranium there. Now, assuming that they attempted to develop uranium-233, and there are some aspects, some indications that they did, the bomb, if it existed, may have been a blended core bomb. Now, these were built by both the United States and the Soviet Union after World War II. In fact, the very first Soviet hydrogen bomb utilized a blended core configuration.
I'm sorry. Let me interrupt here for a second. What you claim that this Japanese bomb was set off? It was tested. Do you have any idea of when that happened?
Yes, right after Nagasaki.
Okay, right after Nagasaki.
Yes, just a couple days after.
There's what evidence
Well, okay, so
What
here's
legitimate evidence is there that that happened?
okay, and the answer is honestly there is not much.
Okay.
We do have indications. We know they were trying to build it. We know that. We know they were interested in both U-235 and U-233. We know the Russians overran massive industrial facilities, and we have Chertok's assertion by way of Smersh that they captured material in some form that was provided a big boost to the Russian nuclear weapons program.
Right.
We know that something that the Russians were producing with captured Japanese machinery was taken back to Russia between the end of World War II and the Korean War. There are newspaper stories of U.S. troops overrunning uranium works during the Korean War. Again, these are consistent, but they are fragmentary. Now, as far as
I just want to make sure our listeners are understand that this is speculation
yes,
at best. So
well, that's true. No, that is true. This is anecdotal by way of Snell's source.
right.
Now, that said, if we allow for Todd Ryder's research, which I believe is impeccable, which indicates that there were actual German prototype nuclear detonations in World War II,
Mhm.
and we know that there was sharing of technical know-how in that regard between Germany and Japan in World War II, and I'll show you one of those in just a minute, then the possibility exists that what Japan set off was perhaps not even a Japanese bomb, but a license-built German bomb. That's a possibility. Now, I will show you here one of the pieces of information indicating the cooperation between Germany and Japan on nuclear weapons during World War II. Give me just a moment. And that's this one right here. Okay, so let's stop sharing this one. Start sharing this one. All right, do you see the paper there that says secret?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now that comes from Todd's research, Todd Ryder, who's been on your show a couple of times. Now, the caption here, as I've written in my article on this on Quora.com, this is a wartime U.S. intelligence summary from July 1944, describing, quote, the interchange of technical information between Japan and Germany following the Japanese announcement that they, too, have discovered the effects of fission and have also said that Germany was working on the project. This is clearly a reference to German and Japanese cooperation in the development of nuclear weapons, and there are others along these lines. So, again, to speak to your point, Keith, you're right. There, as far as there's no trinitite that we can look at today. Like we can go to the desert Southwest and see that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, North Korea is closed off to the west. We can't go and look for daughter products of the alleged test that might have embedded themselves on the Korean shoreline. We can't test cesium-137 or whatever. No, I mean that's correct. What I hope I've been able to show here in this rambling presentation is that there are consistencies between the evidence that we do have. Now, as far as whether Japan actually set off their own prototype, I'm going to put that somewhere between doubtful and debatable, but not impossible. That's the conclusion I've come to. And again, because of the known input of Germany into the Japanese program, I don't think we can discount this. So that's the best I can tell you on that at this point. Now, having said that, I'll give you a couple other points here, and I guess we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
Right. We're getting close, so wrap it up quickly.
All right. Now, you're familiar with the ALSOS technical intelligence mission in Europe. There was also an Asian version of that, which involved Robert Furman. Furman's papers are very interesting reading, including the fact that he was trying to quash information about the German program at war's end. I can show you that. That's in Todd Ryder's book. But anyway, along with that, the British had a parallel organization called the T-Force, the Target Force. There's a book by Sean Longren about this. Now, the T-Force, which included Ian Fleming, who later wrote the James Bond novels, and also Bear Grylls' grandfather, Ted Grylls, was in the T-Force. You've heard of Bear Grylls, seen his program probably. But the T-Force was involved in nuclear technical intelligence. At the end of World War II in Europe, one of the things that the T-Force was looking for was Japanese personnel in Germany. Why would they be bothered with Japanese personnel in Germany? I think it's because they already knew of this technical intelligence sharing on nuclear weapons between Germany and Japan, and they were looking for any information they could find on that. I can't prove that, but I don't know any other reason why they would even bother with Japanese personnel, of who by that point were few in number. Most of them had run for the hills. They were in Switzerland or wherever. So you can do with that what you will. So we know that Japan was working, to wrap this up. We know that they were working on atomic bombs. We know that the Army and the Navy both tried. We know that there was a third center of research and development on the Japanese mainland in Manchuria that came through the Kwantung Army. We know that probably all of these main brain centers were amalgamated into a late war 1944-45 crash project to attempt to develop a Japanese atomic bomb. It was headquartered primarily in Northern Korea, which was then overrun by the Soviets. I can tell you for a fact that at least one Japanese scientist from that effort later was involved in the Chinese nuclear weapons program. So no, Japan is not a victim. They are in fact one of the worst nuclear weapons proliferators on the planet. The North Korean, Russian, and Chinese programs all benefited from Japanese atomic bomb research and development. By the way, regardless of whether they actually did get to a test detonation or not, they had gotten far enough in their theoretical physics and with the construction of industrial machinery that all three of those nations benefited from the Japanese nuclear weapons program. That is a fact. Now, we know that Japan was interested in both U-235 and U-233. Whether all of that amounts together to an actual Japanese functional prototype, I don't know. But all of this information is consistent, and we know they tried. That's as far as I can go, honestly, if that helps you.
I think that's a good wrap on it. And you brought a lot of good information that you've done a lot of research on to pull out. And we appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Absolutely.
Been doing.
Thank you. All right, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new Hidden History.